The ocean was calm, too calm. In the early 1990s, something had changed. For nearly 50 years, the world had lived under the constant shadow of nuclear war. Two superpowers stood ready to destroy each other at any moment. Aircraft carriers had sailed endlessly, prepared for a conflict everyone feared but no one truly wanted. And then suddenly, it was over. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. And for the first time in half a century, America faced an unfamiliar question. What happens to warships built for a war that never came? Some believed aircraft carriers were becoming obsolete, too expensive, too vulnerable, too large for modern warfare. But beneath the surface of global politics, something else was happening. New threats were emerging, less predictable, more chaotic, and far more dangerous. Because the end of one enemy does not mean the end of conflict. It means the beginning of uncertainty. And uncertainty is where aircraft carriers matter most. In Newport News, Virginia, the answer to that uncertainty was already taking shape. It began with steel. Massive sections of reinforced steel, each weighing hundreds of tons, were slowly assembled inside the largest shipbuilding facility in the United States. This was not just construction. This was the creation of a floating airbase, a mobile military city, a weapon system designed to operate anywhere on Earth. Her name would be USS Harry S. Truman, designation C. Kelima N-75. She would become the 8th Nimitz-class nuclear aircraft carrier, but she would also become something more, a carrier built not just for one war, but for whatever came next. From the very beginning, Truman was designed to solve a specific problem: distance. Most military power depends on geography. Air bases require land. Troops require transport. Operations require permission from allies. Aircraft carriers eliminate those requirements. They bring the air base with them. They remove dependence. They create options where none existed before. USS Harry S. Truman was designed to carry that option anywhere on Earth. Her scale alone was difficult to comprehend. She stretched over 1,090 feet long, longer than 3 football fields placed end to end. Her displacement exceeded 100,000 tons, more than 20 times heavier than a modern destroyer. Her flight deck covered over 4.5 acres, enough space to launch and recover dozens of aircraft continuously. But size was only the beginning. Her true power was hidden deep inside her hull. 2 nuclear reactors, each capable of generating enormous energy, enough to power the ship for over 2 decades without refueling. This gave Truman something no conventional warship could match: endurance. She did not need fuel tankers. She did not need frequent port calls. She could cross oceans without stopping. She could remain deployed for months. She could stay where she was needed for as long as she was needed. In military strategy, that ability changes everything. But even nuclear power alone was not enough, because an aircraft carrier without aircraft is just a ship. Truman's true striking force lived above her decks, her air wing. Dozens of aircraft stood ready. A-18 Hornets, fast, agile, capable of both air-to-air combat and ground attack. A-18 Super Hornets, more advanced, greater range, greater payload. Electronic warfare aircraft, designed not to destroy enemy forces, but to blind them. Early warning aircraft, capable of detecting threats hundreds of miles away. Helicopters, rescue aircraft, anti-submarine patrol. Each aircraft extended Truman's reach farther beyond the horizon. Each aircraft turned distance into advantage. Together, they created a weapon system capable of controlling entire regions, not permanently, but precisely when needed. And yet, none of this mattered without the people. More than 5,000 sailors would live aboard USS Harry S. Truman during deployment. Pilots, engineers, technicians, mechanics, cooks, medical personnel. Each one became part of a system designed to operate continuously, day and night, because aircraft carriers do not pause, they do not rest, they function always. Life aboard Truman followed a rhythm few civilians could understand. The ship never truly slept. Flight operations continued around the clock. Jets launched into darkness, returned hours later, then launched again. But below decks, reactor operators monitored nuclear systems with absolute precision. On the flight deck, crews worked inches from spinning jet engines, Temperatures rose. Noise never stopped. Mistakes could be fatal, but discipline held everything together. Because on an aircraft carrier, routine is survival. When USS Harry S. Truman was officially commissioned on July 25, 1998, she entered service during a moment of global transition. The United States was the world's dominant military power, but dominance brings responsibility, and responsibility brings deployment. Almost immediately, Truman began operational training. Her crew prepared for real-world missions. Because carriers are never built for display, they are built for use. Her early deployments took her across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean Sea, into regions where instability could emerge without warning. Her presence alone carried meaning. To allies, she represented protection. To adversaries, she represented uncertainty. Because uncertainty creates hesitation, and hesitation prevents escalation. This was deterrence, not through destruction, but through presence. But history was already moving faster than anyone realized, because in just 3 years, the world would change forever. On September 11, 2001, everything shifted, and carriers like USS Harry S. Truman would become the first response, not because they were closest, but because they were ready, always ready. The nature of warfare itself was about to evolve. Enemies would no longer wear uniforms. Battlefields would no longer have clear borders. Conflicts would stretch across continents, and aircraft carriers would become more important than ever before. Because when threats are unpredictable, mobility becomes power. USS Harry S. Truman had been built for uncertainty. Now she would face it, and soon she would sail into war. The morning of September 11, 2001 began like any other. Sailors aboard USS Harry S. Truman followed routine. Maintenance checks, flight training, system monitoring, normal operations. Then the news arrived. At first, it came as fragments, reports of an aircraft striking a building in New York, then another, then confirmation. This was not an accident. This was an attack. Within hours, the reality became clear. The United States was at war. But this war was different. There was no navy to confront, no more fleet to engage, no more coastline to blockade. The enemy was invisible, unpredictable, and already inside the world's most secure borders. In that moment, the United States needed something it could deploy immediately, something that required no more permission, something already ready to fight. Aircraft carriers became the answer, and USS Harry S. Truman was among them. Unlike land bases, aircraft carriers do not require preparation time measured in months. They require preparation measured in hours. Orders were issued, routes calculated, strike groups assembled. Destroyers, cruisers, submarines, support vessels all converged around Truman, because a carrier never sails alone. It sails as the center of a floating combat network. Together, they formed Carrier Strike Group. There was one major problem. Afghanistan is landlocked, no more coastline, no access from the sea. Traditional naval warfare should have been impossible. But aircraft carriers changed the rules. Because carrier aircraft could travel hundreds of miles inland, refueling in mid-air, extending range beyond what was previously possible. This allowed Truman's aircraft to strike targets deep inside hostile territory, without relying on foreign bases, without waiting for diplomatic approval, without delay. This was the advantage carriers provided: immediate action. As Truman moved into position, tension aboard the ship increased. Everyone understood what was coming. This would not be training. This would be real combat. Pilots studied target maps. Engine crews inspected aircraft repeatedly. Weapons teams prepared precision-guided munitions. Below decks, reactor operators ensured uninterrupted power. Every system had to function perfectly, because failure in combat costs lives. Then came the order: launch. On the flight deck, chaos and precision existed simultaneously. Jet engines roared. Steam catapults pressurized. Crew members moved in carefully choreographed patterns. Each person knew their role. Each movement had purpose. An F-18 Hornet rolled into position, fully armed. Its pilot waited for the signal. A deck officer raised his hand, paused, then pointed forward. The catapult fired and disappeared into the sky. Within minutes, another followed. Then another. Then another. USS Harry S. Truman had entered combat. These missions were unlike previous wars. There were no clearly defined front lines. Targets could appear and disappear quickly. Enemy fighters were rare, but ground-based threats were constant. Surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft fire, hidden launch sites. Pilots flew long missions, often lasting 8 to 10 hours. Fatigue became a constant companion, but the carrier remained, always waiting, always ready to recover them. Because no matter how far pilots traveled, Truman was home. Flight operations became continuous. Day, night, storm, darkness, it did not matter. War does not follow schedules. On the flight deck, crews worked in extreme conditions. Jet exhaust created intense heat. Noise levels reached deafening levels. Communication relied on hand signals. Mistakes could be fatal, yet operations continued with precision because discipline overcame fear. Below decks, thousands of sailors worked without seeing combat directly, but their roles were equally critical. Engineers maintained propulsion systems. Weapons crews prepared munitions. Air traffic controllers coordinated flight operations. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Every person aboard Truman contributed to combat capability, because carriers are systems built on human coordination. Without people, the ship is powerless. With them, it becomes unstoppable. As weeks turned into months, Truman's presence became part of a larger strategy. Continuous pressure, continuous surveillance, continuous readiness. This prevented enemy forces from regrouping, prevented safe havens, prevented stability, because instability weakens enemies. This was not a single battle. This was sustained warfare, and carriers made it possible. But combat operations revealed something else: the importance of endurance. Unlike land bases, carriers could reposition quickly. If threats shifted, Truman moved. If missions changed, Truman adapted. If escalation occurred, Truman responded. This flexibility gave commanders options that did not exist before, and options create advantage. For sailors aboard Truman, war became routine. Long hours, constant alert, limited rest. Letters from home arrived weeks late. Communication was limited. Isolation became normal. But purpose sustained morale, because every sailor understood the mission mattered. They were part of something larger, something historic, something necessary. Over time, Truman's Air Wing flew thousands of combat missions, striking infrastructure, supporting ground forces, providing surveillance, deterring further attacks. Each mission contributed to overall strategy. Each mission extended Truman's operational legacy, because aircraft carriers do not win wars alone. They make victory possible. But combat was only the beginning, because the wars that followed would last years, not months. And USS Harry S. Truman would deploy again and again and again. Because modern war does not end quickly. It evolves, it adapts, and carriers must adapt with it. Soon, Truman would face new conflicts, new enemies, new challenges, mechanical failures, political uncertainty, operational exhaustion. Because survival in combat is only one test, endurance over decades is another, and USS Harry S. Truman was built to endure both. She had entered war. She would not leave it anytime soon. War did not end. It expanded. What began as a response to a single attack evolved into something far larger. Multiple battlefields, multiple enemies, multiple regions. And through it all, one requirement remained constant: persistent air power. This is where aircraft carriers like USS Harry S. Truman became indispensable, because carriers do not need permanent bases. They bring permanence with them. After her initial combat operations, Truman returned home briefly, but rest was temporary. Maintenance crews worked around the clock. Systems were inspected, aircraft were serviced, new sailors arrived, veterans departed. Because carriers operate in cycles: deploy, return, repair, deploy again. The cycle never truly ends. Soon, Truman sailed again, this time toward the Persian Gulf, one of the most strategically critical regions on Earth. A narrow body of water surrounded by tension, oil routes, military rivalries, political instability, and constant uncertainty. Her presence there was not accidental, it was strategic, because positioning determines influence. As Truman entered the region, her aircraft resumed combat operations. Targets included terrorist infrastructure, weapons storage sites, command centers, support networks. Each strike was carefully planned, carefully executed, because modern warfare prioritizes precision, not destruction alone, but effectiveness. Pilots launched from Truman's deck knowing their missions mattered, because they were not just flying aircraft, they were shaping events on the ground. The carrier itself became a floating command center. Radar systems monitored airspace constantly. Surveillance aircraft extended detection range hundreds of miles. Electronic warfare aircraft disrupted enemy communications. Every system contributed to battlefield awareness, because awareness prevents surprise, and surprise determines outcomes. But Truman's mission extended beyond combat. She provided deterrence. Her presence alone forced adversaries to reconsider aggression, because confronting an aircraft carrier means confronting overwhelming force. This is the paradox of carriers. Their greatest strength is often not in what they do, but in what they prevent. Months at sea tested endurance, not just of machinery, but of people. Sailors worked long shifts, often 12 hours or more. Sleep became irregular, time blurred, days and nights lost meaning. But routine maintained stability, because routine creates structure. Structure creates resilience. Life aboard Truman was isolated. The ship operated far from land, far from families, far from normal life. Communication with home was limited. Internet access was restricted. Phone calls were rare. Isolation became part of service. But service gave purpose, because everyone aboard understood why they were there. They were maintaining global stability. Flight deck operations remained the most dangerous environment. Jet engines generated immense heat. Temperatures could exceed dangerous levels. Noise levels required constant hearing protection. One mistake could cause serious injury. Yet crews operated with precision, because precision prevented accidents, and accidents could stop operations. As years passed, Truman became one of the most active carriers in the fleet. Deployments continued across multiple regions: the Arabian Sea, the Mediterranean, the North Atlantic. Each deployment served different purposes: combat operations, joint exercises with allied navies, strategic deterrence, humanitarian readiness, because carriers must be versatile. They must respond to any situation. Her aircraft evolved as well. Older aircraft were replaced with newer, more capable versions. F-A-18 Super Hornets provided greater range, greater payload, greater survivability. New radar systems improved detection capability. New weapons improved strike precision. Truman adapted continuously, because adaptation ensures relevance. But constant deployment created strain. Machinery aged. Systems required maintenance. Electrical networks faced increasing demand. Engineers worked tirelessly to maintain readiness, because maintenance determines survival. Neglect leads to failure. Failure leads to vulnerability. Despite these challenges, Truman continued to deploy, because global demand for carrier presence remained high. Aircraft carriers provided something irreplaceable: immediate response capability. No other military asset could match it. Not bombers, not ground forces, not missile systems. Only carriers could arrive quickly, stay indefinitely, and operate independently. For adversaries, Truman represented uncertainty. They could not predict her movements. They could not ignore her presence. They could not match her capabilities easily, because building aircraft carriers requires immense resources, immense technology, immense expertise. Truman represented decades of naval evolution. Her crew became part of that evolution. Each sailor contributed to operational readiness. Each deployment added experience. Each mission added history, because carriers are defined not just by design, but by service, and Truman had served continuously. But endurance brings new risks. Years of operation increase mechanical stress. Electrical systems degrade. Components wear down. Eventually, even the most powerful machines require repair. And in Truman's case, a major failure was coming, one that would test not her combat capability, but her survival. Because sometimes the greatest threat is not the enemy, it is time. USS Harry S. Truman had endured combat. She had endured deployment. She had endured global responsibility. Now she would face something different: uncertainty about her own future. For over 2 decades, USS Harry S. Truman had done exactly what she was built to do: deploy, fight, deter, endure. She had crossed oceans, launched thousands of combat missions, served in regions where stability depended on her presence. She had become one of the most reliable aircraft carriers in the United States Navy. But even the most powerful warships are not immune to time. And in 2019, something went wrong, something serious, something that could have ended her operational life. It began quietly, deep inside the ship's electrical distribution systems, the network responsible for delivering power throughout the carrier. Power to radar systems, power to aircraft launch equipment, power to navigation, power to everything. Without electrical stability, an aircraft carrier cannot function, and Truman's electrical systems were beginning to fail. At first, the issue appeared manageable. Engineers monitored performance, maintenance crews attempted repairs, but the problem was more complex than expected. Electrical failures spread across critical systems, components malfunctioned, power fluctuations threatened operational safety. The ship could not deploy safely. For the first time in years, USS Harry S. Truman was forced to stand down. This was not a combat loss, not damage from enemy attack, not battle damage. This was mechanical vulnerability, a reminder that even nuclear-powered carriers rely on fragile systems, and when those systems fail, the carrier becomes vulnerable. The Navy faced a difficult decision: repair Truman or retire her early. Early retirement was unthinkable. She had years of operational life remaining. But repairs would be expensive, complex, time-consuming. For months, Truman remained docked, silent, inactive, her flight deck empty, her aircraft gone, her future uncertain. For sailors assigned to Truman, the silence was unfamiliar. This was a ship accustomed to motion, accustomed to purpose, accustomed to deployment. Now she waited. Engineers worked tirelessly. Electrical systems were dismantled, replaced, tested, rebuilt. Every repair brought progress, but uncertainty remained. Because repairing a nuclear aircraft carrier is not simple. It is one of the most complex engineering challenges on Earth. Outside the ship, debate intensified. Military planners questioned the future of aircraft carriers. Some argued carriers were becoming obsolete, too vulnerable to modern missile systems, too expensive to maintain, too risky in future conflicts. Truman became part of that debate, not because she had failed in combat, but because she had revealed vulnerability. But vulnerability does not equal defeat, and Truman was not finished. Months of repair led to gradual recovery. Electrical systems stabilized. Power distribution returned to normal. Systems came back online. Radar, navigation, flight deck equipment, everything slowly returned. The carrier was coming back to life. Then came the moment that mattered most: sea trials. This was the ultimate test. Could Truman operate safely again? Could she perform her mission? Could she return to service? The ship left port, moved into open water. Engineers monitored every system, every signal, every fluctuation. Failure here would end her operational future. Success would restore her place in the fleet. System by system, Truman passed the test. Power remained stable. Propulsion functioned perfectly. Radar systems operated normally. Flight deck operations resumed. Aircraft launched successfully, recovered successfully. The carrier was operational again. USS Harry S. Truman had survived her greatest internal crisis. But survival alone was not enough. She needed to prove she remained relevant, because in modern warfare, relevance determines survival, not just physically, but strategically, and Truman would soon prove it. In the years following repairs, Truman deployed again, returned to active service, returned to contested waters, returned to global operations. Because aircraft carriers do not exist to remain in port. They exist to project power, and Truman was ready. Her return sent a clear message, not just to allies, not just to adversaries, but to the world. USS Harry S. Truman was still operational, still capable, still ready. Because endurance defines great warships, not perfection, but recovery. Her crew returned with her, thousands of sailors, each one contributing to operational readiness, each one continuing the carrier's mission. Because ships are not defined by machinery alone. They are defined by people, and people give carriers purpose. The crisis of 2019 became part of Truman's identity, not as a failure, but as proof of resilience. Because survival under uncertainty builds strength, strength that cannot be manufactured, strength earned through endurance. USS Harry S. Truman had faced mechanical failure. She had faced uncertainty. She had faced the possibility of retirement, but she endured, and now she would continue, because her mission was not finished. She had survived war. She had survived time. She had survived herself, and now she would sail forward again. Warships are built from steel, but their legacy is built from time. By the time USS Harry S. Truman returned fully to operational service, she was no longer just another aircraft carrier. She had become something else, a survivor. She had endured global war, decades of deployment, mechanical crisis, strategic uncertainty, and she was still sailing, still operational, still ready, because aircraft carriers are not designed for a single moment in history. By the early 2020s, the global security environment had changed once again. New rivals emerged, new technologies threatened traditional naval dominance. Hypersonic missiles, advanced submarines, cyber warfare. The nature of war continued evolving, but one thing remained unchanged. Aircraft carriers still provided something no other military asset could fully replace: presence, immediate, flexible, persistent. And USS Harry S. Truman remained part of that presence. Her deployments continued across critical regions: the Mediterranean Sea, the North Atlantic, the Middle East. Each deployment carried strategic meaning. Each movement was watched. Because aircraft carriers influence events simply by existing. Their presence alters calculations. For allies, they provide reassurance. For adversaries, they create hesitation, because confronting a carrier strike group carries enormous risk. A carrier never sails alone. Destroyers escort her. Cruisers protect her. Submarines operate silently nearby. Aircraft extend her reach. Together, they form one of the most powerful naval formations ever created. And at the center of that formation, USS Harry S. Truman. Her flight deck remained active. Aircraft launched daily. Pilots trained continuously. Because readiness is not created during war. It is created before war. Every takeoff, every landing, every drill prepared the crew for real combat. Because when conflict begins, preparation determines survival. For sailors aboard Truman, life continued in cycles: deployment, return, maintenance, deployment again. Years passed, new sailors arrived, veterans moved on. But the carrier remained constant, a symbol of continuity, because ships like Truman exist beyond individual service. They belong to generations. Inside the ship, routines continued. Reactor operators monitored nuclear systems. Engineers maintained propulsion. Technicians maintained radar and weapon systems. Flight crews prepared aircraft. Thousands of individual tasks combined into one operational system. Because aircraft carriers are not single machines, they are networks of human coordination. And coordination creates power. Outside the ship, the world remained unpredictable. Conflicts emerged suddenly. Political tensions escalated quickly. Military planners relied on carriers for rapid response, because carriers provide options, options without permanent bases, options without political delay, options without warning. USS Harry S. Truman provided those options, quietly, consistently, reliably. She was not the newest carrier. Newer carriers introduced advanced technology, improved systems, modern designs. But Truman possessed something newer ships did not yet have: experience. Experience built through deployment, through crises, through endurance. Because experience cannot be manufactured, it must be earned. Her crew understood that experience. They walked passageways shaped by decades of service, worked in spaces where thousands had served before them, maintained systems that had supported combat operations across the world. They became part of something larger than themselves, part of history still unfolding. Aircraft carriers represent more than military strength. They represent commitment. Commitment to allies, commitment to stability, commitment to readiness. USS Harry S. Truman represented that commitment for over 2 decades, and she continued to represent it. One day her service will end. Her reactors will shut down. Her decks will fall silent. Her systems will power off for the final time. Every warship eventually reaches that moment. But legacy does not end when ships retire. Legacy continues through history, through memory, through impact. USS Harry S. Truman's legacy is not defined by a single battle, not defined by a single war, but by endurance, by presence, by readiness across decades of uncertainty. She served when the world changed. She served when war evolved. She served when doubt emerged, and she continued serving. Because aircraft carriers do not exist for recognition, they exist for readiness. They wait beyond the horizon, prepared, silent, watching, ready to act when needed. USS Harry S. Truman remains one of those carriers, still sailing, still serving, still ready. Empires change, enemies evolve, technology advances. But beyond the horizon, a carrier still sails, not seeking attention, not demanding recognition, but ready when the world calls. USS Harry S. Truman.